The first crack came not from my lawyer, but from someone who used to run an online news column that specialized in scams. She dug. She called the payment processor. She obtained documents showing multiple victims. She published a thread. There are moments on the internet when the air changes. You can feel it like a draft slipping under a door. The thread amplified. Reddit. Then a regional foodie blogger who'd once mentioned my son in a comment. People started to connect dots. Marcus, who'd bragged about being a top mentor cohort, now had posts flagged as associated with a scam. Someone messaged Talia's account asking pointed questions. She deleted a post. Her smile in the videos looked less convincing. Then the real payoff began. Transaction reversals. Alerts. The bank froze some of the transfers. A court subpoena landed for one of the processors. Marcus watched as the account that had been his lifeblood dried to a trickle. He'd relied on lies to sustain a persona. The person selling the dream was also taking the money and vanishing. He paced the apartment, refreshing inboxes. The apartment went quiet. Talia's text stopped being romantic. She started asking direct questions. Where's the proof of payment? Who verified the company? Marcus had none. The landlord knocked. Rent overdue. Eviction warning. He tried to pawn equipment. The pawn shop offered pennies. His followers, mostly the kind that chased sparkle, began to look away. Engagement dropped, and then, the toughest, most public twist, a local news segment picked up the story. The investigative reporter called me, asked for the documents, for an on-the-record statement. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted people warned. I gave them what I had. They aired it. Local victims say they were scammed by online mentor promising fortunes. One victim, an elderly woman whose money was transferred from a family account, says she lost thousands. Authorities say, beat. Marcus watched his world unravel in pixels and print. He was still for a second like the man who'd still believed in the script. But the script had shifted. His narrative of cut the dead weight? It looked petty on TV. The smugness drained. The screen became his indictment. That night, Talia left. Quiet. No yelling, no theatrics. She took her charger, her bag, and the dinnerware she'd brought. She left the team and the empty promises. Marcus didn't chase. He had no legs left under him. But the crowning piece, the one that made him face the consequence beyond personal collapse, came in a way he couldn't control. The bank, armed with my documentation and the complaints of other victims, executed a trace. They discovered an affiliate network that had been laundering money through shell companies. The state's cybercrime unit coordinated with the payment processors. Another family, not mine, a woman and her 2 kids, had their joint account drained. She filed. She fought. She stood where I refused to stand for a decade because she had the stomach for the fight I'd learned to grow. A raid. Subpoenas. A blog post with source documents. The mentor's payment processor was suspended. The mentor's public persona collapsed into an IP address and a WhatsApp number used for payment confirmations. Authorities could not immediately recreate every cent. Scams leave holes. But they could freeze accounts, seize funds in transit, and present Marcus with a legal environment he hadn't budgeted for. Short pause. One morning, like a slow thunder, the sheriff's department handed him a notice. You are a named witness and possible recipient of proceeds from an ongoing fraud investigation. He had to come in. He had to explain his payments. He had to answer for where the funds came from and where they went. The humiliation in that moment was not violent. It was administrative, official, papered, beat. That's the kind of justice that bites not only the false bravado, but the ledger behind it. He could no longer pretend to be a martyr building empire. The law demanded receipts. The law demanded he be accountable, but I didn't orchestrate arrests. I provided evidence and let the proper institutions do their job. Active revenge doesn't mean playing judge. It means seeing the system work for victims. Soft. The fallout was public. Video clips of his confident posts recirculated with captions that made him look small. The motel where he slept for a week because he couldn't be served? People mocked it. His followers left in waves like birds abandoning a tree with no fruit. HR called. Marcus's internship evaporated into a "we can't justify this" profile, and the company asked him to take a leave. The worst part was not the financial hit. It was the realization that his choices produced isolation. His level up had exacted its own price. I watched all that from a different vantage. I was not in his feed. I had a lawyer. I had a bank fighting on paperwork. I had journalists who had promised to verify before they published. I had done the thing that takes more effort than any scream. I had prepared. But here's where I made a choice that matters. Once the investigation started, I could have used the heat to humiliate Marcus personally, publicly broadcast the private texts, the moments where he begged me to wire more, the small moments of cruelty. Many suggested it. People wanted a spectacle. Soft, I refused. Why? Because the point wasn't to watch him burn. The point was to make sure other mothers, other victims, could see that fraud has consequences and that level-up preachers selling urgency are often the ones who will vanish with the money. I wanted his collapse to be instructive, the final case study. So I filed the complaints, answered the investigators, and let the system do what it does when it's given facts. Short pause. That is active revenge, strategic, lawful, and public in its consequences. Not petty, not cruel, guaranteed. It was a month after his meltdown. I was home making tea. The house smelled like lemon and laundry soap. My evenings had become simple rituals. A crossword, the kettle, a book on the couch where the light fell just right. I'd set up a plan for him if he ever came back. Terms. Earn trust. Work. No more automatic bailouts. Respect. At 3 a.m., I woke and checked the porch light out of habit. Nothing. I went back to bed. The next morning, I found him on my steps. He hadn't knocked first. He paced, thinking maybe I'd come out and beg. He hadn't expected that my absence meant I'd built a life without him in it. Beat. For a moment, he was stuck in the spatial shock. The porch, the same doorknob he'd once grabbed after too many nights out. The mailbox the same, but the presence inside different. He looked disheveled, hair greasy, hoodie a size too big, eyes hollow. He said nothing. He just sat on the step like a child who had been told to wait. I watched him for a long time. I could have opened the door and swept him back as I used to. I could have taken his shaking hands and pretended it never happened. Short. But there's a point where enabling is cruelty. There's a point where love without accountability becomes permission. When I opened the door, he looked smaller than I remembered. He said, "I messed up." He believed it now, not the performance version, but the raw truth. He said, "I lost everything. I didn't fall into theatrics. I offered a bargain, roof, food, a strict set of rules. Work or else. A plan to rebuild." I told him, calmly like a teacher giving homework, that forgiveness is not free. He wept then. Not in a showy viral way, but deep and breaking. For the first time, he looked at me and saw the person who had always loved him, not the obstacle he could cut. He didn't deserve mercy then, but he needed help. So I gave him something harder than charity, accountability and a path to earn it back. That is another kind of justice. Soft. He had to face the consequences he invited. He also had to learn the muscle of making amends. After the knocks and the raid and the public humiliation, life settled into a new rhythm. Marcus worked 3 jobs to pay restitution and to stabilize his life. He scrubbed floors. He packed boxes. He walked the route of work every morning, ashamed and steady. He showed up for therapy. He paid back what he could. It was slow. It was ugly. He relapsed briefly into old bravado, but then he'd remember the empty fridge and the look on the investigator's face and come back down to earth. The mentor? He disappeared into a web of shell companies and offshore accounts. Not all predators get their day in court. Some skirt and vanish. But the public exposure did 2 crucial things. It stopped a few more victims from wiring money, and it created a banner of evidence for those who kept fighting. Several of the payment processors changed their policies. A handful of copycat accounts got flagged. For my part, the money that had been stolen was recovered in part through bank reversals and small settlement negotiations. Not everything came back. Scams cut a lot of corners. But I wasn't ruined. I rebuilt the accounts that mattered. I set in place protections and boundaries that kept me safe, and the most unexpected thing. The life I built after the motel, the small job I took, the knitting circle, the nights where I read without the sense of waiting for permission, felt steadier than any life I'd had when my identity was measured in how much I gave. I wasn't cruel in my active revenge. The legal action, the complaints, the public exposure, those were to stop harm. The real personal revenge was showing him I could survive without his approval, and then standing quietly while life taught him what I couldn't have said in words. Short pause. The real payoff was not handcuffs. It was not posturing. It was the slow, complete reversal of roles. He had asked me to die. He wanted me gone so he could be free of obligation and consequence. Instead, I removed myself on my own terms. Then I used the systems available to me, the bank, the law, the press, to ensure his false empire had no ground left to stand on. He faced the shame publicly. His followers evaporated. His clients realized they were victims, and a few of his victims confronted him on calls, recording their stories. The man he'd worshipped, the mentor, collapsed into internet dust. The con artists go where the money flows. Cut the line, and the con artist finds their account barren. That was the heavy, active payoff, a legal unspooling of what had been built on other people's trust. Not a revenge fantasy with fireworks, but the quieter, stronger thing, systems working. People exposed. Victims getting files. Scammers scrambling. At home, I made a shelf for the stack of paper the bank had finally returned to me. A small stack, but it sat like a monument. I brewed tea. I liked the sound of the kettle. Some nights I still slept fitfully, but mostly, in the quiet, I felt the steady thrum of a life rebuilt. Long pause. If you stay with one sentence, boundaries are not cruelty. They are survival. I could have stayed and fought him with guilt and shame, and lost a part of myself in the process. Instead, I chose the cold, careful path. Document, report, protect, and, when necessary, let the institutions built for this sort of harm do their work. That is active revenge that's also moral. It sets a precedent. You can't steal from your mother and expect no consequences. You can't build a life on other people's trust without paying the price. Lessons I lived. Paper is power. Keep records. Save messages. Screenshots and timestamps are the bones of any later complaint. Boundaries are life insurance. You can be loving and still refuse to be used. Revenge that heals is systemic. Don't try to make someone suffer for the sake of suffering. Use the law and the facts to stop harm from spreading. Forgiveness is earned. It isn't a free pass to be abused again. You can build again at any age. I rebuilt my life after being pushed out. So can you. Soft smile. I opened the door for Marcus, not because I had nowhere left to go for him, but because I wanted him to see the cost of his choices and have a chance to repair them. That's mercy with a line attached. It's a hard, generous thing. It's the kind of love that does not coddle. If this story touched you, if it made you think about the boundaries in your own life, leave a comment. Tell me one lesson you'd teach someone before it's too late. And if you found this satisfying, please like and subscribe. I read every comment. Just die. He said it like it was an instruction. Beat. He screamed it at me in our own hallway, and the house was full of other people, of noise, of proof that I didn't matter. Short pause. I didn't flinch. I didn't beg. I packed a small purse and walked out. Long pause. 3 weeks later, everything he'd built on lies collapsed, and I didn't have to lift a finger to finish him off. Beat. Stay with me. If you've ever been told you're too much or you've stayed quiet to keep the peace, hit like, subscribe, and tell me one life lesson you'd teach someone before it's too late. Drop it in the comments. Now, let me tell you how the rest of my life started the moment he wished I'd disappear. Soft. Exhaled. It was a breathless morning, late summer. The hallway smelled faintly of laundry detergent, and the cheap cologne my son had started wearing to sound important. I'd been in his life since before he could tie his own shoes. Late nights at the ER when his fever spiked, Band-Aids on palms after bike crashes, the quiet in the kitchen as I made cornbread for college exams. I had the small, ordinary fingerprints of a mother all over my house. Marcus, 23, with a jaw that had stopped softening into a smile, had been slipping. Not fast enough to notice over one coffee, but steady, like a temperature rising. Eventually, his eyes started burning with a glow that I'd seen only in old movies when actors glowed about a delusion. That day, he slammed a phone down because someone in his live stream had said something about leveling up. He walked into the kitchen like a king. I said, "Marcus, please pick up your socks." Small thing, habit, the kind of request that used to be answered with a moan and a, "Yes, Ma." Now he paused, and in front of me he said, "Cold and tight. You're holding me back. You're blood-leeching my future." Short pause. Then, "Just die." "I don't give a—" The words landed like a slap, but I didn't breathe sharp or raise my hand. I reached into the hall closet, grabbed my small purse, phone, charger, $20 in cash I'd hidden in a Bible years ago, and I left. No tears, no argument about dignity. The house stayed loud behind me. Beat? He thought he'd won. Quiet. I didn't leave because I was broken. I left because I'd finally had enough of being the backdrop in someone else's theater. The decision was small and simple. Leave on my feet. That night, I sat in a cheap motel bed, and the world reorganized into 2 columns. Before him, after him. But leaving was only the beginning. You need to understand how fast a person can be swallowed by an idea. Marcus found him on a weekend scroll. Slick videos, glossy angles, confidence turned into a brand. The mentor's feed was a collage of gold watches, white sneakers, Lamborghini shots cropped to just the steering wheel. He said things like, "Parents are anchors. Cut them loose. Passion pays if you pay the right price." For a kid who'd drifted through temp jobs and part-time hours, who'd been told by some bosses he was nice but not driven, these words were an invitation. It was language that turned shame into opportunity. The scammer didn't sell a product. He sold permission. Permission to burn bridges. Permission to be selfish and call it growth. It started small, like a cold that you ignore. $97 for a PDF course. $219 for a strategy call. Then a few hundred more for AI funnel hacks. The mentor made scarcity a religion. Last 50 spots. Today only. Countdown timers glowed red. Testimonials used stock photos. Marcus posted screenshots on his story like proof. I asked questions, the gentle, real kind that usually slowed him down. Who runs that site? Where's the office? Beat. He snarled at me like I'd interrupted communion. This is for people who are thinking big, he said. He didn't think big. He believed a perfectly packaged lie. He needed the identity, the digital entrepreneur, more than he needed rent paid or his clothes washed. Beat. The first theft happened 2 months in. $3,000 disappeared from my joint card. I confronted him in his room. "Marcus, did you use my card?" He looked away and said, "It's an investment." Short. "You'll get it back triple." When I demanded to know how that counted as an investment, he stood, chest forward, voice low and venomous. "You're a leech," he said. "You always were." Then he pushed. He called me old, dated, a burden, and the worst thing? He believed it. It wasn't manipulation. It was conversion. Crisp, clipped sentences. Build tension. I froze the cards. Filed fraud reports. Spent nights on hold listening to elevator music that sounded like a countdown to an empty future. He escalated. $5,000. $8,000. Wiring to names like Next Phase Capital or anonymous crypto wallets. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark and printed transaction histories. My hand shook. He didn't stop. He started posting videos where he announced he'd cut off negative family energy. He filmed the kitchen I'd cleaned for decades and said, "Why would she want to keep this old house?" while viewers clicked like, I was in my own life and not in it at the same time. The person who tucked him in at 3 a.m., who paid for braces, who walked him to kindergarten. All of it slipping into the background of his new narrative. The bank said it looked like permission. My name, my laptop, the tools of my life on his device. The transfer history followed a path too familiar to be anything but brazen. The bank would help. They needed a signature, a report, paperwork. I filed it all. He cheered when I left. He thought I'd been banished. He posted a video with a mug that said boss energy and a caption like a scalpel. Cut the dead weight. Level up. I watched from motel rooms. I watched him with his smug, empty grin. And I began to plan, not because I loved revenge, because he had stolen something I couldn't replace with words, the right to be safe in my own home. Soft. The law is slow, but it listens to paper. Paper was my weapon. There's a difference between rage and method. I let rage sit. I translated anger into action. Step 1, evidence. I had bank statements, screenshots of his bragging, copies of the transaction confirmations he'd sent himself like a child making paper trophies. I went to the bank again. I made files. Printed every live stream screenshot that showed our address or our home as his backdrop. I archived the messages where he told me to die. I saved the video he posted telling the world he'd cut ties. I downloaded a copy and stamped it with the date. Step 2, legal. I found a lawyer who didn't blink when I said my son stole from me. He asked 2 things. 1, do you want restitution? 2, do you want him stopped from further access? I said both. Step 3, contact the right people. The scam had a tail, sign-ups, payment processors, and a very particular online voice. I reported the mentor, not to mob justice, but to the authorities who track fraud, the Bank Fraud Unit, the Federal Trade Commission, and the State Attorney's Cyber Unit. I sent them the timeline and the money trail. I also saved every video the mentor ever posted to a secure drive, and sent a note to investigative journalists who'd covered online grifts before. They called me back. Step 4, protect myself. I set up separate accounts, closed old ones, changed passwords, reset 2-factor. There's a ritual in reclaiming your life that feels boring and sacred, like changing the locks on a house inside your brain. It steadied me. Most of all, I didn't call him. I didn't check his accounts. I did what was most radical at that moment. I stepped away from being his safety net. That's not cruelty. It's boundary. The mentor vanished the way predators do, not with courage, but with a server switch and a bunch of empty comments. Sites deleted. Discord servers wiped. Accounts closed. It was quiet. Too quiet. Marcus refreshed his inbox until his fingers blistered. I'd reported the payments and provided the bank with the transaction routes. They were tracing. They told me not to post anything, to let the investigators work. I didn't want publicity. I wanted justice. But the internet is a sponge. Once a thread starts, it spreads.